Imagine you are waking up one morning, sometime in the 13th century. The room around you is quiet. The light through the window is thin and pale. You lie still for a moment, and then, before you rise, you remember something your grandmother told you when you were very small. She said, "Never get out of bed on the left side." She said it without ceremony, the way you might say, "Don't forget your cloak," or "the well is frozen." It was simply part of knowing how to live. This video is about that kind of knowing. Medieval superstition was not, for the most part, about fear. It was about navigation. People in the medieval world looked at the sky, at animals, at the positions of stars, at the behavior of fire, and they believed, genuinely and carefully, that these things were speaking. The world was layered with meaning. Every event had a cause that went beyond the visible. Tonight, we are going to move slowly through that world. We will look at 5 corners of medieval life where superstition was not the exception, but the framework, where belief shaped decisions and decisions shaped lives. There is no need to rush. Settle in. Part 1. The Language of Omens. How signs in nature shaped daily decisions. Before we understand medieval superstition, we have to understand something about the medieval relationship with the natural world. Today, when a crow lands on a fence post outside your window, you see a bird. You might appreciate it or ignore it, or find it interesting for a moment before moving on. But in medieval Europe, that same crow carried information. It was a message, possibly about illness, possibly about death, possibly about something arriving from far away. The question was not whether it meant something. The question was what exactly it meant and how you should respond. This was not naivety. It was a system. The medieval worldview, shaped by centuries of Christian theology, blended with older folk traditions stretching back into pre-Roman times, held that the universe was not random. Everything had been made with intention. The stars were not scattered by accident. The seasons followed a divine rhythm. Animals behaved according to natures given to them at creation. If you learned to read these patterns carefully enough, you could understand something about what was coming. And more importantly, you could prepare. Omens were divided broadly into 2 categories. There were those that warned of misfortune, and those that promised good things ahead. Both were taken seriously. Both required attention. Consider the behavior of birds. In many parts of medieval Europe, the direction from which a bird called could determine whether an undertaking was safe or dangerous. If you were planning a journey, a long one, across uncertain roads, through forests where bandits sometimes waited, you might listen before you left the house. A bird calling from the right was generally favorable. The right side, in medieval symbolic thinking, was the side of God, the side of correct order. A call from the left carried a different weight entirely. This might sound like a small thing, but understand the context. A journey in medieval Europe was not a casual matter. Roads were rough. Weather was unpredictable. Illness could come on quickly. Robbery was not uncommon. The risk was real. And so any signal that might indicate whether to go or stay held genuine value. If the birds were quiet, or if the signs were unclear, a prudent traveler might wait a day, or leave before dawn when the world was still and the omens had not yet spoken. Animals, more broadly, were understood as sensitive to things beyond ordinary human perception. Dogs, in particular, were believed to sense approaching death. If a dog howled at night, persistently and without visible cause, it was taken in many communities as a sign that someone nearby would die soon. This belief appears across medieval Europe, in manuscripts, in folk records, in the margins of legal documents where a scribe paused to note what the dog had done before the lord of the manor passed away. The belief was not uniform. Interpretations varied by region, by century, by local tradition. But the underlying logic was consistent. Animals knew things, and their behavior was worth watching. Plants and the weather carried meaning as well. A sudden blooming out of season could be read as a sign of something unusual approaching. Unusual frosts, unusual winds, a stillness in the air before a storm. These were not simply weather. They were events in a language that required interpretation. And interpretation was a skill. There were people in every community who were understood to be better at reading these signs than others. Older women often. People who had lived long enough to see patterns repeat across decades. Sometimes priests, sometimes not. The village elder who remembered that the last time the river ran that particular shade of brown, there had been a flood 3 days later, held valuable knowledge. That knowledge moved from person to person through quiet conversation, through the repetition of phrases passed from parent to child. It is worth slowing down here to notice something important. These beliefs were not separate from practical life. They were woven into it. A farmer deciding when to plant was watching the sky, yes, but also watching certain animals, noticing which direction certain birds were flying, paying attention to how the soil felt underfoot on particular saints' days. The decision of when to plant was a religious, ecological, and omen-based one simultaneously. You could not always separate the categories. There were also personal omens, signs that applied to an individual rather than to a community. Sneezing could be protective or dangerous, depending on when it happened and how many times. Itching in certain parts of the body carried specific meanings in different regional traditions. A sudden chill, a flickering flame, a ringing in one ear. These were not dismissed as coincidence. They were noted. They were thought about. One of the most enduring omen traditions involved the direction a person first looked upon waking. Some traditions held that the first face you saw in the morning could color the entire day. If you woke and the first person you encountered was someone associated in your mind with bad fortune, a person known for unluckiness perhaps, or someone who had recently suffered a loss, there were ways to counteract the influence. Certain gestures, certain spoken words, small rituals performed quietly, quickly before the day could take its shape from that beginning. What strikes the modern observer about all of this is not the strangeness of the specific beliefs, but the coherence of the underlying worldview. Medieval people were not simply accumulating superstitions randomly. They were maintaining a system, a set of tools for understanding and managing uncertainty. Life in that era was full of uncertainties that modern medicine, modern weather forecasting, and modern infrastructure have largely removed. The infant mortality rate was high. Harvests could fail without warning. Disease moved through communities without predictable patterns. Against all of that uncertainty, a framework for reading signs was not a luxury. It was a kind of comfort. And sometimes it was a substitute for knowledge that simply did not exist yet. The omens were also deeply social. They were discussed. When something strange happened, an unusual animal appeared, a tree fell in a windless night, a fire behaved in an odd way. People talked about it. The interpretation was communal. Someone would suggest a meaning. Someone else would remember a precedent. An older person would offer a story about something similar that had happened 30 years ago and what it had meant then. In this way, the language of omens was also a language of community cohesion. It bound people together in a shared way of seeing the world. And that shared way of seeing, even when it was wrong in its specific predictions, offered something real. The sense that the world was legible, that it could be understood, that you were not entirely at the mercy of blind chance. We will return to this idea, the idea of systems and communities, as we move through each part of this video. For now, carry with you this image. A medieval farmer standing at the edge of a field in early spring, listening to the birds, watching the sky, deciding whether today is the right day to begin. He is not being irrational. He is doing what he was taught to do, what his father did, what the people around him do. He is reading the world as carefully as he can, with every tool available to him. And then, when the signs seem right, he begins. Part 2. The Body as a Map. Medical superstitions and the fate of the sick. When illness came to a medieval household, it entered a world that already possessed a complete and deeply interconnected understanding of what sickness meant. Disease was not viewed as an isolated biological accident. It existed within a grand structure that combined medicine, religion, philosophy, astronomy, astrology, and observations gathered over centuries of human experience. To modernize, many of these beliefs appear strange or irrational, but to medieval people they formed a coherent system that explained why illness happened, how it spread, and how it could be treated. This system was not built entirely on fantasy. Medieval healers and physicians often made careful observations about the natural world. They noticed that certain herbs reduced pain or fever. They understood that clean bandages improved healing. They recognized that crowded and filthy places tended to produce more sickness than fresh and open environments. They observed that diet affected health, that rest mattered, and that emotional distress could worsen physical suffering. Many remedies used in medieval medicine actually contained ingredients with real medicinal properties, even if the practitioners themselves did not fully understand why those remedies worked. Yet all of these practical observations existed within a much larger worldview. Medieval people believed that the human body reflected the structure of the universe itself. The body was considered a microcosm, a smaller version of the cosmic order. Just as the heavens operated according to divine and celestial laws, so too did the organs, fluids, and emotions within the human body. Health depended on harmony between the person and the wider universe around them. Much of this thinking originated in ancient Greek medicine, especially in the teachings of the physician Galen. His writings survived through the preservation and translation work of Arabic scholars, whose medical texts later spread throughout medieval Europe. Galen described the body as governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor was linked to one of the 4 classical elements: air, water, fire, and earth, and also to the seasons of the year and the temperaments of personality. Blood was associated with warmth and moisture, with springtime, and with an energetic and cheerful personality. Phlegm represented coldness and moisture, tied to winter and calmness. Yellow bile was linked to heat, dryness, anger, and summer. Black bile represented coldness, dryness, melancholy, and autumn. According to this theory, health existed when these humors remained balanced. Illness appeared when one humor became excessive or deficient. A physician's task, therefore, was not simply to identify a disease, but to determine which imbalance had disturbed the body's natural harmony. Treatments aimed to restore equilibrium. If a patient was considered too hot, cooling foods or medicines might be prescribed. If too much blood was believed to be present, bloodletting could be recommended. Diet, exercise, sleep, emotional state, and environment all played roles in maintaining this delicate balance. Over time, medieval medicine expanded this already complex framework by incorporating astrology. The movements of planets and stars were believed to influence both the natural world and the human body. Each humor became associated with celestial bodies. Different planets governed different organs and bodily functions. The zodiac signs were mapped directly onto the body itself, beginning with Aries ruling the head and ending with Pisces ruling the feet. To a modern observer, this may sound purely mystical, but medieval physicians considered astrology an essential scientific tool. Universities that taught medicine often included astrology as part of the official curriculum. Doctors consulted astronomical charts before making decisions because they genuinely believed the heavens affected human health. The moon, in particular, was thought to influence fluids within the body, just as it influenced tides in the ocean. If a patient suffered pain in a certain body part, a physician might examine the current zodiac position before performing treatment. Surgical procedures were often carefully timed. Operating on a body part while the moon occupied the zodiac sign associated with that region was considered dangerous. It was believed that the tissues would bleed more heavily and heal poorly under those conditions. This belief was not marginal superstition practiced only by peasants. It appeared in respected medical manuals and scholarly writings used throughout Europe. Imagine being a patient living in the 14th century. Perhaps you have severe pain in your leg or swelling in your joints. You might seek help from a barber surgeon, a monastery healer, or a local herbalist whose family had practiced healing for generations. The healer would study far more than your symptoms alone. They would ask about your age, habits, recent meals, emotional state, sleep patterns, and bowel movements. The color and smell of urine were considered especially important diagnostic tools. Physicians sometimes carried urine charts showing different shades believed to correspond to particular illnesses. Your complexion and personality could also be analyzed because they were thought to reveal your dominant humor. A naturally cheerful person might be considered sanguine, meaning dominated by blood. A quiet and sad temperament might suggest excessive black bile. Even the season of the year mattered because the environment itself influenced bodily balance. Once the healer had gathered this information, treatment could begin, but only if the timing seemed favorable according to the stars and moon. The treatments used in medieval medicine ranged from surprisingly effective to entirely symbolic. Herbal medicine was widespread, and many plants genuinely helped patients. Willow bark, for example, contains compounds related to modern aspirin. Honey could help prevent wound infection. Garlic possessed antibacterial properties. Mint soothed digestion. Medieval healers learned many of these effects through generations of trial and observation. However, useful remedies often existed alongside treatments based on symbolic associations. Certain herbs were connected to planets or saints. A plant ruled by Mars might be used for blood-related problems because Mars was associated with heat and violence. Remedies were selected not only for physical effects, but for spiritual or cosmic correspondences. To medieval practitioners, there was no sharp distinction between medicine and superstition. The categories modern people separate into science, religion, and magic overlapped heavily in medieval thought. A prayer, a medicinal herb, and an astrological calculation could all belong naturally within the same treatment plan. Pain and illness were also understood spiritually. Disease could be interpreted as punishment for sin, as a divine test, or as an opportunity for spiritual growth. Yet, this did not mean medieval people simply accepted illness passively. They actively pursued treatment. Physical healing and spiritual healing were considered inseparable rather than contradictory. Prayer played an important therapeutic role. Patients prayed to saints associated with particular diseases. Saint Apollonia, for example, was invoked for tooth pain. Saint Roche became associated with plague victims. People visited shrines believed to possess miraculous healing powers. Pilgrimages to holy sites were undertaken by the sick with genuine hope of recovery. Relics held extraordinary significance within medieval medicine. A fragment of a saint's bone, a piece of clothing connected to a holy figure, or water touched by sacred objects could be treated almost like medicine itself. Pilgrims traveled enormous distances to reach famous healing shrines. Some carried home tiny containers of holy water or cloths touched against sacred relics. From a modern perspective, these relics did not possess supernatural medical power. Yet the experiences surrounding them sometimes produced real benefits. Pilgrimages often removed people temporarily from unhealthy urban environments. Travel provided fresh air, exercise, and access to supportive communities. Hope itself could improve mental resilience. Emotional comfort and reduced stress may have aided recovery in ways medieval people could observe, even if they misunderstood the mechanism. Medieval society also possessed a partial understanding of contagion. People clearly recognized that some diseases spread between individuals. During plague outbreaks, cities established quarantines, isolated the sick, and restricted movement. Ships arriving from infected ports were often forced to wait before passengers could disembark. Entire households might be sealed off. However, medieval people usually explained disease transmission through the theory of miasma, corrupted or poisonous air, swamps, decaying matter, foul smells, and crowded streets were believed to generate unhealthy vapors that entered the body and disrupted the humors. While incorrect in its mechanism, this theory occasionally encouraged behaviors that reduced infection risk, such as avoiding filthy environments or improving ventilation. To protect themselves, people carried aromatic herbs, flowers, and spices, believed to purify the air. Physicians treating plague victims famously wore strongly scented substances inside masks or pouches near their noses. Fires and incense were burned in homes and streets to cleanse the atmosphere. Protective charms and amulets also occupied an accepted place in medical practice. Stones, metals, written prayers, and symbolic objects were thought to possess healing or protective properties. These items were not viewed merely as folk superstition by ordinary villagers. Learned medical texts discussed them seriously. Emeralds were believed to help epilepsy. Red stones were associated with stopping bleeding because their color resembled blood. Coral necklaces worn by children were thought to protect against illness and evil influences. Verses from scripture might be sewn into cloth bags and worn around the neck as protective devices. Again, what stands out is how complete and internally consistent the medieval understanding of illness was. Every aspect of disease had an explanation. There were reasons why illness appeared, reasons why some people recovered while others died, reasons why certain times were dangerous and others favorable. The sick person was not abandoned to meaningless randomness. They occupied a universe filled with order and significance. This worldview provided emotional stability in a frightening world where disease was common and medical options were limited. Medieval life involved constant exposure to injury, infection, famine, and epidemic outbreaks. Infant mortality was high. Even minor wounds could become fatal. In such conditions, people naturally saw systems that made suffering understandable. Modern medicine explains disease through bacteria, viruses, genetics, and cellular processes. These explanations are scientifically powerful, but they can also feel emotionally cold and impersonal. Medieval medicine, despite its inaccuracies, gave people a sense that illness existed within a meaningful moral and cosmic framework. Patients were not simply passive victims of blind biological forces. They could pray, seek remedies, perform rituals, make pilgrimages, and participate actively in the struggle for recovery. That may be the most important thing to understand about medieval medical superstition. It was not simply ignorance or stupidity. Medieval physicians were often intelligent, educated, and observant individuals working within the limits of the knowledge available to them. They inherited traditions stretching back centuries and attempted sincerely to understand the human body using the intellectual tools they possessed. Their beliefs emerged from the same deeply human need that continues to shape medicine today. The desire to explain suffering, reduce fear, and restore a sense of control when the body becomes vulnerable. Part 3. Sacred Numbers, Sacred Days. How the calendar ruled medieval life. Time in the medieval world was not neutral. This is a difficult thing to fully grasp from the perspective of a modern life, organized around clocks and schedules and the steady, unmarked flow of hours. But for a person living in medieval Europe, time was profoundly uneven. Some hours were safer than others. Some days were protected by the presence of powerful saints. Some dates were shadowed by ancient associations with misfortune. And the movement through the year was not simply a sequence of seasons. It was a liturgical and cosmological journey, full of meaningful thresholds. The church calendar was the primary grid through which time was understood. It organized the year into a cycle of feasts, fasts, commemorations, and holy seasons. Every day had a saint associated with it, someone whose life had a particular quality, whose death had occurred on that date, whose intercession might be especially available on the anniversary of their passing into heaven. If you needed help with a particular kind of problem, you went to the saint whose day was near, or whose specialty matched your need. But layered beneath and alongside this official structure was an older system of auspicious and inauspicious days that predated Christianity entirely and had been absorbed into the folk calendar with remarkable persistence. The dismal days, from the Latin dies mali, or evil days, were 2 days in each month considered to be particularly unlucky. They were linked to the ancient Egyptian calendar, filtered through centuries of astrological tradition, and recorded in manuscripts and almanacs across medieval Europe. These were days on which you avoided beginning new enterprises, signing agreements, traveling if you could help it, or undergoing medical procedures. The dates varied slightly between traditions, but the practice of observing them was widespread. Friday, in many medieval traditions, carried a heavy weight. The crucifixion had happened on a Friday, which gave the day a somber association. Meaningful, but cautious. Beginning a journey on a Friday was considered unwise in many communities. Starting a new project on a Friday might invite difficulty. This was not a minor social convention. It was taken seriously enough to be mentioned in letters, in diaries, in the records of communities where decisions were made, and then quietly revised when someone pointed out the day of the week. Numbers wove through everything. 3 was the number of the Trinity, and so it carried holiness. Things done in threes had additional protection. Prayers said in sets of 3. Remedies applied 3 times. Knocks on a door counted in sets of 3 before entry. 7 was the number of days in creation, of the cardinal virtues and the deadly sins, of the classical planets. It appeared in folk remedies, in legal customs, in the structure of rites of passage. 13 was already, in some medieval traditions, acquiring the shadowed reputation it still carries, associated with the Last Supper, with transgression, with incompleteness. The thresholds between years were particularly charged. The period surrounding the solstices and equinoxes, already meaningful in pre-Christian Europe, was layered with Christian significance. But the older energies persisted. The 12 nights between Christmas and Epiphany were understood in many traditions as a liminal time when the boundary between the ordinary world and something else was thinner than usual. Animals, in some beliefs, were said to gain the power of speech on certain of these nights. Fires were kept burning. Doors were treated carefully. The new year itself, wherever it was calculated, since different communities marked its beginning at different times, was a moment of vulnerability and promise simultaneously. What you did in the first hours of the new year could set the pattern for everything that followed. Some communities believed that the first person to cross your threshold after midnight determined the character of the year ahead. A dark-haired man was generally considered fortunate. A woman, in many regional traditions, was not. These beliefs were acted upon. People arranged for the right person to knock first, made small adjustments to ensure the year began correctly. The seasons carried their own ritual obligations. Spring was a time of renewal, but also of careful attention. The soil was waking, the animals were restless, and many of the protective customs associated with land and livestock were performed in the early spring days. Midsummer was a time of fire and of the edges of things. A night when herbs picked at exactly the right moment had special potency, when water from certain springs was particularly healing, when the veil between worlds was considered thin. In agricultural communities, the calendar of planting and harvest was deeply intertwined with the calendar of saints and stars. The feast of a particular saint might mark when to plant a particular crop. The position of the Pleiades in the night sky was a marker for certain agricultural decisions. The flowering of specific plants indicated readiness in the soil. All of these signals, sacred, celestial, biological, were read together by people who had grown up learning to read them. The Sabbath, Sunday, was protected time. Work on Sunday was not simply socially frowned upon. It was believed to bring bad luck, to mark the worker in some spiritual way, to disrupt the order that kept communities healthy. Stories circulated of people who had worked on Sunday and suffered for it. Crops that failed, livestock that sickened, objects that broke without reason. These stories were not invented maliciously. They were maintained because they served a function. They reinforced the rhythm of rest, which had genuine value, in a form that made that rhythm feel cosmically supported. There is something almost restful about a world organized this way, when every day has a name, a quality, a set of associations. The passage of time becomes less anonymous. You are not simply moving through a neutral sequence of hours. You are moving through a calendar that knows you, that has expectations of you, that rewards certain behaviors and cautions against others. And if you paid attention, if you observed the days carefully, kept track of the saints, watched the phases of the moon, remembered what had gone well on similar days in past years, you were not passive in the flow of time. You were, in a real sense, working with it. Part 4. The world of witches and wise folk. Community belief and social control. Every medieval village had someone people turned to when ordinary remedies failed and the usual explanations no longer made sense. These individuals stood at the margins of formal authority, but at the center of everyday necessity. When illness lingered despite prayers, when livestock weakened without clear cause, or when misfortune seemed to repeat itself in patterns too persistent to ignore, people sought help from those believed to understand the hidden dimensions of the world. This person might be an older woman who had spent decades learning which plants soothed fever, which roots eased pain, and which mixtures could be applied to wounds. Her knowledge was not written in books, but accumulated through lived experience, observation, and transmission from other women in her community. It was practical knowledge, tested not in theory, but in survival. In other cases, the figure might be a man known locally for his unusual sensitivity to problems that could not be easily explained. He might be believed capable of finding lost objects, identifying the cause of unexplained illness in animals, or determining why a household had fallen into a streak of misfortune. Across Europe, such individuals were known by different names: cunning folk in some English regions, wise men and women in others, and a variety of local titles elsewhere. Despite the differences in terminology, the social role was broadly similar. Importantly, these figures were not primarily feared in their everyday community context. They were consulted. People approached them not as threats, but as resources. They were part of the informal healthcare system of medieval life, operating alongside parish priests, barbers, and herbal tradition. This distinction matters because modern imagination often compresses the medieval witch into a singular figure of fear and persecution. While witch trials and accusations did occur, and sometimes with devastating consequences, they represent only one aspect of a far more complex social reality. In everyday practice, the relationship between communities and these practitioners of folk knowledge was pragmatic. Their services addressed immediate concerns. They were asked to identify the source of misfortune, particularly when misfortune appeared intentional. A child's sudden illness, a cow's inability to produce milk, or a series of accidents in a household might all be interpreted not as random events, but as the result of hidden interference. The wise person might be asked to determine whether someone had caused harm through malicious intention, whether through spoken curses, ritual acts, or other forms of supernatural influence. Equally important was the reversal of such harm. Remedies could involve counter-charms, spoken formulas, ritual cleansing, or herbal treatments combined with prayer. The boundaries between medicine, magic, and religion were not rigidly defined in practice. A healing charm might be recited alongside a Christian prayer, and a herbal remedy might be considered effective precisely because it was accompanied by spiritual invocation. This blending reflects a worldview in which physical and invisible forces were deeply interconnected. The same logic extended into matters of love, fertility, and social relationships. Wise folk were often consulted on whether a romantic union would succeed, how to attract a partner, or whether a suspected betrayal was occurring within a marriage. These concerns were not trivial. They were central to survival in tightly knit agrarian communities, where inheritance, labor, and alliance structures depended heavily on stable relationships. Underlying these practices was a widespread belief in the permeability of the boundary between natural and supernatural causation. The Christian Church officially condemned magical practices, whether harmful or beneficial. Yet the reality on the ground was more ambiguous. Many ordinary believers, including some clergy at the local level, did not clearly distinguish between a protective charm and a prayer, or between a blessing and a ritual act intended to influence outcomes. The categories that later theological systems tried to separate were often blended in lived experience. The logic behind harmful magic mirrored the broader medieval understanding of the world. Reality was seen as structured by layers of visible and invisible forces. Words carried power, intentions shaped outcomes, and objects could be imbued with influence beyond their material form. If healing could be achieved through such means, then harm could also be transmitted in the same way. This symmetry made the system internally consistent. Anything capable of being used for good could, in theory, be reversed for harm. One of the most widespread expressions of this worldview was the belief in the evil eye. This concept existed not only in Europe, but across the Mediterranean world, the Middle East and North Africa, where it shared remarkably similar features. The core idea was that certain individuals could unintentionally or deliberately transmit harm through a gaze. Envy played a central role in this mechanism. A look directed at a healthy child, if charged with jealousy, could cause illness. Praise without protective words could unintentionally strip fortune or stability from the object of admiration. Protective practices developed accordingly. Spitting was used as a symbolic act of rejection, intended to expel harmful influence. Blue beads and colored threads were worn as protective amulets. Children might be dressed in specific ways or marked in particular manners to divert attention or confuse the gaze of others. These practices varied by region, but their underlying logic remained consistent. They attempted to manage invisible forces believed to circulate through social interaction. What makes the evil eye belief particularly revealing is how closely it reflects the social dynamics of medieval communities. Life was lived in close proximity. Inequality was visible. Some households prospered while others struggled, often within the same village and under the same environmental conditions. This visibility created emotional tensions, especially envy, which was both socially powerful and difficult to openly acknowledge. The belief in the evil eye provided a symbolic language through which these tensions could be expressed and managed indirectly. Illness in this context was rarely understood as purely biological. It was also social in meaning. When a child became sick, the community did not only ask what physical cause might explain it, but also what social imbalance might have contributed to it. Had someone looked upon the child with harmful intent? Had jealousy or resentment disrupted the balance of relationships? Identifying the source of misfortune was therefore also a process of diagnosing social friction. Within this system, wise folk occupied an ambiguous but essential position. Their expertise made them valuable, and therefore they were respected and frequently sought out. Yet, the same knowledge that made them useful also made them potentially dangerous in the eyes of others. If someone could remove a curse, they were assumed to understand how to place one. This dual possibility created a persistent tension in how they were perceived. Trust in these individuals was never absolute. It depended on outcomes, on continued success in healing or problem solving, and on their ability to maintain good standing within the community. A healer who succeeded was affirmed, one whose interventions failed risked suspicion. If illness persisted or worsened after their involvement, interpretation could shift rapidly from healer to cause of harm. It would be incorrect to reduce accusations of witchcraft solely to social manipulation or personal rivalry. Belief in magical causation was genuine and widely held. People truly feared that harm could be inflicted through unseen means. At the same time, patterns of accusation often intersected with social vulnerability. Those who were isolated, economically dependent, socially marginal, or otherwise outside strong kinship networks were more exposed to suspicion. Unusual knowledge or behaviors could also heighten unease and make individuals more visible as potential sources of danger. In this sense, superstition was not merely a set of irrational beliefs, but part of the structure through which social order was maintained. It influenced who was trusted and who was vulnerable, who could be integrated and who could be excluded. It provided frameworks for interpreting misfortune, but also mechanisms for assigning responsibility. The medieval world was not unique in possessing such systems of belief. However, it expressed them through its own conceptual vocabulary, shaped by Christian theology, folk tradition, and local practice. Understanding these beliefs is not simply an exercise in studying the past. It is a way of understanding how human communities organize uncertainty, assign meaning to suffering, and negotiate the boundaries between care and control. Ultimately, it shows how tightly woven belief and social structure can become, and how, under pressure, those same structures can both sustain and fracture communal life. Part 5. Birth, Marriage, and Death. Superstition at the crossroads of life. The moments of greatest change in a human life were the moments most saturated with superstition. This is not surprising when you think about it carefully. Superstition accumulates where uncertainty is highest, where the outcome matters most, where the normal tools of prediction and control feel insufficient. And nothing in medieval life carried more weight or more uncertainty than the arrival of a new person into the world, the joining of two people and two families in marriage, and the departure of a soul from the body into whatever came after. These were thresholds, and thresholds, in the medieval imagination, were dangerous places. Places where the ordinary rules of the world were temporarily suspended, where outside forces could enter, where care was essential. Childbirth in medieval Europe was a genuinely dangerous event. Maternal mortality was significant. Infant mortality was higher still. The precariousness of new life was not an abstraction, but a daily reality in communities where families had lost mothers and children, often enough for everyone to know the sorrow of it. Against this reality, every protective measure available was brought to bear. The room where a woman gave birth was carefully prepared. Certain objects were introduced: relics, blessed candles, specific herbs, images of saints associated with childbirth and with the protection of infants. In many traditions, iron was placed near the mother or the newborn as a protective element. The association between iron and protection from malevolent forces was ancient, predating Christianity and absorbed into folk practice with remarkable tenacity. A knife beneath the pillow, a horseshoe above the door. These were not decorations, they were wards. The moment of birth itself was freighted with significance. The position of the planets at the exact hour of birth was thought to influence the character, the fate, and the potential of the newborn. This was not folk belief alone. It was academic belief, supported by learned astrological theory. The casting of a natal horoscope, where resources allowed for it. was a way of understanding the child who had just arrived, of knowing what tendencies they carried and what influences they might need protection against. But there were simpler signs as well. A child born with a caul, a fragment of the amniotic membrane over the face, was considered lucky in many traditions and particularly protected against drowning. Cauls were preserved, sold, kept as talismans. Sailors paid for them. The reputation of the caul-born child for luck and perception followed them through their life. The days and times of birth carried meaning too. A child born at midnight or at noon or at the exact moment of a solstice was thought to have unusual qualities, more sensitive to invisible things, more likely to perceive what others could not, or alternately, more vulnerable to certain forces that moved through the world at those liminal hours. The management of such a child required understanding. Parents were advised by those who knew these things how to protect and guide a child whose birth had placed them in a particular relationship with the unseen. Marriage was another kind of threshold, and it came with its own elaborate system of protective and auspicious customs. The timing of a wedding was carefully considered. Certain months were favorable. June was associated with the goddess Juno in ancient tradition, and even in the Christian medieval world, early summer retained a reputation for favorable unions. May, oddly, was considered unlucky for marriage in many English and French traditions, a belief whose origins are uncertain, but whose persistence is well documented. Weddings in May were avoided by those who could arrange it. The day of the week mattered. Monday had certain associations, Tuesday others. The phases of the moon influenced the timing of weddings as they influenced so much else. A waxing moon was associated with growth and increase, making it favorable for a union intended to expand into children and prosperity. A waning moon suggested decrease, and so was avoided for new beginnings. The ceremony itself was surrounded by customs that carried protective and symbolic weight. The threshold of the church, the threshold of the new home, these were sites of particular attention. Carrying a bride over the threshold was not merely a romantic gesture. It was, in its origins, a way of getting her across a dangerous boundary without her feet touching the ground, where harmful things might wait. Throwing grain or seeds over the couple was an act of sympathetic magic, an association between fertility in the agricultural sense and fertility in the human sense, a wish made in physical form. The wedding ring, placed on a specific finger, was associated in medieval tradition with a vein said to run directly to the heart. The joining of two people was thus made tangible in the body itself, not merely a legal or spiritual arrangement, but a physical bond, traced in the body's own architecture. After the wedding, the couple moved into their shared life, carrying with them a set of beliefs about how to maintain the health of that life. Dreams continued to be observed. The behavior of animals around the household was noted. Small daily rituals, the way a fire was lit, the direction of certain gestures, the proper response to various omens, continued to manage the invisible forces that surrounded ordinary life. And then at the end, death arrived. And the threshold of death was, perhaps, the most carefully attended of all. Death in the medieval world was a slow process in many cases, and that slowness was used. A dying person was meant to have time to prepare, to confess, to receive the last rites, to say the proper words, to have the proper prayers said over them. The departure of the soul was an event requiring assistance, and the community gathered for it. After death, the body required careful handling. It was watched through the night, in the tradition of the wake, a word whose origins lie in the practice of staying awake with the dead, ensuring that the spirit's departure was peaceful and complete, that nothing disturbed the transition. Windows might be opened to allow the soul to leave. Mirrors were sometimes covered, in the belief that a soul caught by its own reflection might become confused and linger. The period of mourning had its own rules. Certain behaviors were protective, wearing specific colors, avoiding certain activities, keeping the household in a particular state for a defined period of time. These rules varied widely across regions and centuries, but their underlying purpose was consistent: to manage the transition between a world that had contained this person and a world that no longer did, to give both the living and the dead a pathway through that change. What connects all of these moments, birth, marriage, death, is the recognition that the ordinary management of life is not sufficient at certain points, that there are moments when human beings need more than practical tools, when they need ritual, when they need the assurance that the invisible world has been addressed, that the forces operating beyond perception have been acknowledged and, as far as possible, managed. This need is not limited to the medieval period. It is recognizable across times and cultures in forms that change while the underlying impulse remains. The medieval expression of it was elaborate, specific, tied to a particular cosmology. But the need itself was simply human. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all of this. Medieval people were not simply afraid of the world. They were trying to understand it, carefully, seriously, with every tool available to them. The omens they read, the days they observed, the wise folk they consulted, the rituals they performed at birth and marriage and death. None of it was random. It was a language, a long, patient, communal effort to make the uncertain feel navigable. The specific beliefs have faded. The calendars have changed. The birds outside your window no longer carry the same weight they once did. But the impulse beneath all of it, the desire to find meaning in a world that does not always offer it easily, that has not gone anywhere. It simply speaks in different words now.